Steve, tell us about the history of Pellegrino Group Australia and how your family became involved within the field of property development.
Well, I commenced in the inner suburbs of Melbourne in terrace housing. But if we talk about my family, I think it probably goes back to my grandfather. On my mother's side, we come from an area called Park Orchards, which is like the start of the Yarra Valley, and he was a buyer and seller of farms and land 100 years ago, so wow. 1920s. So if you know the areas of Park Orchards and Warrandyte, that's where he used to deal. So that's probably where it filtered through into my genes. But I commenced in the area of Carlton, North Carlton, Fitzroy. Really only had a boss 2 years of my life, from 18 to 20, and that's where I learnt the ropes. And that took me into buying and restoring terrace houses. And that grew up into a fairly successful business for about 10 years. And so that's where I commenced.
And what was the motivating factor or the driving factor? What drew you into property? Was it that family tradition, or did you just like the idea of
property was always talked at the table. Always liked looking at properties, so there was that love of it. And I suppose starting in the terrace housing of Carlton just at the right time, as Carlton and Fitzroy and Clifton Hill and then Brunswick took off. And my enjoyment of restoration, I suppose, came from there. And it's quite interesting, through our later years, some of our most enjoyable, not necessarily our largest projects, have been ones where we've restored old buildings in different cities and turned them into retail. And I think that experience came through from the days in the terrace houses of Carlton and Fitzroy.
And how did you go from sort of renovating and flipping terrace houses into commercial real estate and into property development at a wider level?
A state government tax created that. So without going into names of politicians, there was myself and another group who were we were the largest in buying and selling terrace houses in the inner suburbs of Melbourne. And through a new government, a new state government, they decided to introduce double stamp duty, because previous to that it didn't exist in Victoria. And this really killed off our industries. And so I went from terrace housing after 10 years, I moved into retail and industrial. And my competitors, you probably know them, they're called Jada, or then today they're called Central Equity.
Yeah.
So I took them obviously into high rise. So it was quite interesting, where a government regulation that they thought they were going to bring in extra money and income actually ended two types of businesses, but created opportunities for us.
And we're obviously in Brisbane today, but the business got its start in Melbourne in the 70s. How different was Melbourne back then to what it is today?
The real difference was that in obtaining permits, buying sites was very straightforward. And you would buy a particular site and within 6 months you're on site. Yeah. Today with regulations, as a developer, you tend to, and I don't think it's really even changed I think it has changed in Melbourne, the same as we experience here in Queensland, is that you spend half your time in councils and in courts to get your permits, and then, so, and you miss a bit of the enjoyable thing, which takes you longer to get to.
And walk us through some of those early projects in Melbourne, or at least some of your signature projects or projects that have stood out.
Yeah, well look, I was in Melbourne at an interesting time when the transition went from residential to industrial and retail. I drive down, I started really off Bridge Road, Richmond. I bought the corner of Punt Road and Bridge Road, and bought all those shops right up the hill and converted them into the rag trade. Put back all the Victorian verandas and so on. So that really came from my restoration and love of restoration through my earlier history in terrace houses. But as you grow a business and you look for more opportunity, I realised that for us to grow at the rate that we could and capacity, we had to create stock. So I moved out to the east and commenced doing a lot of industrial estates. And that really became our core business. So the areas of Ringwood, Bayswater, Oakley and so on became our mainstay. Our largest estate, which took us 10 years to develop, is Merrindale out in Dorset Road, which is a significant development and one that we're very proud of. Yep.
And Paul, run us through, you obviously grew up with property in the blood and in the family. Run us through your involvement with the business.
Yeah, well, I guess it's sort of 4 or 5 generations I've been involved. So I guess similar to Dad as well, as hearing it at the dinner table, always being around family friends at the same time, always talking about property as well, and in different degrees. And so I used to get dragged along on Saturdays to auctions, and that was probably where you start to sort of cut your teeth and get a bit of an appreciation for how to buy something and cut the price down to get it for the right price. And so watching him is probably where he shines the most. So that was always a bit of fun. And then that transferred over to going to construction sites and seeing how what would happen when they were developing things. So this was all when I was 12, 13 years old even, or younger, and so you start to get a keen interest in, when you're younger, just watching it and because it's interesting, but then starting to understand parts of it, and then later through after school got involved in real estate. So I started initially for my cousin's firm in Melbourne called CVA Property Consultants. So Ian Angelico's my first cousin, Dad's nephew. He gave me my start there as a cadet. And that was predominantly in industrial real estate, and I really had an appreciation, and I still quite like the sector, and really sort of cut my teeth through there.
And what were some of those key learnings during that period, the formative years when you were a teenager, when you were in your 20s, that you've sort of looked back on and have helped guide you with what you're working on today?
I think assessing everything on its, not just on its face value, but with the merit of that site, seeing what the opportunity could be, and trying to, I guess, be a little bit creative in the way of thinking about how to approach it to get the best use out of it. So definitely having a think about everything that, a lot of things come past our desks from agents and other people, so considering them in the right way to see, is there an opportunity in it, and if there isn't, don't waste anybody's time, move on. And I guess through the real estate days at CVA, the big one was relationships in that one, and making sure they service their clients. So they've had clients for 20 odd years that they still service. That's led to other work through associations that they've made. So that was something that really got instilled in me there before I went to a corporate firm.
And you also went to Bond University and did a property degree there. A lot of people in property don't have degrees, a lot of people do. What did you learn from that experience, and how important do you think it is to get those learnings from a property degree?
Yeah, that's an interesting question as well, because I was working so I'd moved up to Queensland at this time, so I moved up in 2005 to take a position at CBRE. And I sort of did the rounds there, then ended up in the industrial team, sort of where I wanted to be. So I'd been working for probably 4 years, out of school 5 years, and didn't have any intention of going to university. I think I did 6 months at Swinburne and got pretty bored, so sort of just went to work. And then this course had just started, and I guess first of all what attracted me to it was the trimesters, so I could get it done in 2 years. So that was good, that I didn't have to do sort of 3 to 4 years. I'm not a great student, so it was a big draw card. But I think the main thing out of it was they actually had some quite good lecturers who were still relevant in the industry. So the ones there that could actually talk about current affairs in terms of the broader industry, that was quite interesting, and have led to networks as well through those people. And I think that's probably the benefit of Bond over some other universities, that you have access to those people. Yeah. And you meet some pretty interesting people globally.
So you worked in real estate, then you went on to work at Mirvac. What was that like? What did you learn from your time there?
Well, I was 09, so it was just after GFC, so it was an interesting time. So some mass redundancies there. Somehow managed to get a position out of about 100 applicants. And they said, you're going to be in the acquisitions team, but we're not acquiring at the moment, we're disposing. So I went on to to Waverley Park, out in Mulgrave, Glen Waverley. Huge estate they're doing there, 1,200 homes. I think they're still going, 10, 15 years. So I started on that project before transitioning into the acquisitions team.
Right, okay. And Steve, obviously the business expanded from Victoria into Queensland. Why was that, and what was the opportunity that you saw?
Yes, look, it was interesting times. It was the recession that we had in 89, 90, and where we acquired some very good property in Melbourne, but it was a wait and see sort of acquisition. So we bought city buildings, industrial buildings, redid our leases and waited for the market to come back, because it took Melbourne about 3 years. So you had time on your hands and you look for opportunity, and we started to investigate up here in Queensland, and we saw a lot of opportunity up in Cairns. And probably one of our proudest properties was the first acquisition in Queensland. We bought the old post office and telegraph building, which was going to be demolished, and I convinced the council and Australia Post to sell it to us, and we restored it into a duty-free. So today it's a DFS Louis Vuitton building. So and probably the most prominent corner of Cairns, opposite a new casino that was being built at the time. So we looked at the profit ratios, and it was just so far superior to either Melbourne or Sydney at the time. And from that we bought the Northern Brewery, which today is owned by CUB and so on, and we bought that and we converted that into a homemaker centre. And we saw the profits that were in it by moving heavy into the bulky goods sector. And that really started our relationships with BBC, which became Bunnings. Jerry Harvey, the first store, we put him into our centre up there in Cairns, and that started a 20-year relationship.
And what's the focus of the business today? Is it still doing those bulky goods centres? Is it still doing commercial, or is it doing sort of a mixture?
We've since Paul has joined me, he's obviously brought all his talents from that he learnt at Mirvac and working for a public company of that size. So we are looking at residential, but the opportunities that did come up for the Pellegrino Group was actually in commercial, and especially here in the city of Brisbane.
And what are the challenges or benefits, I guess, in pursuing commercial developments over doing residential development or over doing one of the other asset classes?
Look, it really depends on the site and the opportunity. The commercial is different from the residential, because if we do a residential development, it's stock, it's trading stock, yeah, which is a profit, for example. Building that Paul has just completed now in McLaughlin Street, just very close to us in the James Street precinct, yeah, that is a hold for us. Yeah. So it's a different criteria, it's a different thought, and I suppose the experience that we've had in holding homemaker centres in Queensland and seeing the growth that we've picked up, that in a lot of ways was bigger growth than we could have got from, say, Melbourne at the prices that we would have had to pay at the time. Yeah. We saw those benefits. So as a family, we're very strategic in what we choose to develop, to hold.
And Paul, Steve just touched on the new project there at McLaughlin Street. Tell us about that. How did that come about, and where is it at the moment?
We've owned it for a few years, the site. We actually bought one lot, and then we had a smaller commercial scheme on that, which we did in about 2015. I think the DA came out in 16. Yeah. And then as soon as we got the DA, of course, the site next door came up for sale. And it was an estate, and we got a call from a residential agent from the other side of town, which is a bit odd, and we ended up, long story short, getting him in on Australia Day. He was happy to come in, and we did the deal the old-fashioned way with him and wrote the contract, and we had a signed agreement that night. So he said obviously we're the right person to buy it. But what it did, it gave us enough size to go up in a bit more height, yep, and have more of a prominent holding. Now where it is in the James Street precinct, they're not easy to come by sites like this, controlled by a lot of older families who have been around. So for us, it was something that we saw as, you know, a potential to do quite a quality development. We then ran a residential scheme on it, but then we're just a little bit cautious about the amount of stock that was coming on in sort of 17. I think rightly so. So we sort of shelved that, and then we got a bit more comfort again in the commercial market, and putting a bit more stock on the market. So we transferred it again, it's third DA, and have done a boutique office development. So it's about 4,000 square metres. So it's all come together quite well. We essentially have 5 levels of office, ground floor retail, and then a dedicated rooftop for the tenants. So it's all sort of, you know, PCA A grade in terms of design and quality, 6-star Green Stars design as well. We're attracting a really good calibre of tenants, not only from a covenant perspective, but they'll seem to be pretty good people as well, which is going to be a fun place to work and a good place to work, where we hope to see people cross-pollinating a bit and everyone maybe doing business together, or you just get to know your neighbours, and it's the ability of being able to do that in a boutique building.
And you've got quite a number of projects, or you've completed quite a number of projects in Fortitude Valley where we are now. What's the attraction here, do you think, either for you guys as developers or for tenants moving into your buildings?
On the commercial perspective, in terms of the Brisbane Brisbane fringe market, if you go back 10 to 15 years ago, you know, the largest and probably preferred main fringe market would have been Milton. We're now seeing a consolidation of what's called the renewal precinct, being Fortitude Valley, R&A Showgrounds and Newstead being the preferred fringe, and the vacancy rates reflect that as well compared to any other market if you look at Spring Hill, South Brisbane or Milton. A few reasons for that. You've got a big high street like James Street, which has a lot of life in it, where some of the other ones have really struggled over more recent years, say in Milton and Spring Hill. So there's no real heart or soul to them, which does, you know, affect the culture of offices. And a lot of people are moving here because of the amount of apartments that have been built predominantly in Newstead. Really great place to work. Employers now thinking about, you know, being employer of choice where our employees living, and there's a lot who are residing this way. So there's a lot of attention in terms of leasing activity that's happening through the renewal precinct. So the opportunities there for us. We know the patch quite well. One day it'll, you know, other opportunities will come up, of course. We'll look at other areas, but for the commercial projects we've been doing, we see probably more appetite from tenants being on this side than looking to the south side of the city. And
Steve, you've done projects in Townsville, Cairns, Brisbane, all over the place. What are some of the intricacies in each of those markets, and how difficult is it to get a development underway in Cairns or in Townsville or whatever the case may be?
It's really picking your market, and your timing is very, very important. Because they are regional centres, they're affected by different factors. Cairns itself, really relies on tourism, and we know that there's waves, and you really got to pick that 5-year wave. Townsville, quite different, and it's really the next regional city after Cairns, obviously coming south. That is a stronger market, and we've held more property there. We own a lot of homemaker centres, Bunnings centres and so on. And we just watch that market very well, and factors like that, you've got the largest army base in the country is there. You've got all the mining that comes out of Mount Isa and beyond, they come into Townsville. So this, and a bit of tourism like Cairns, but it's got these other factors that keeps it strong all the time. And that's reflected in our tenants. It's quite interesting, a town of 175,000 people, you know, the Bunnings store would be in the top 3 or 4. The Super Cheap is the #1 in Australia. Beacon Lighting, I think, is in the top 3 or 4, and on and on and on. So it's quite interesting. So we really watch our cities. You've got to have an intricate knowledge, just not get in and get out. But likewise, we own a lot of other sites that we might sell out of because they're more trading rather than holding, and it doesn't fit our regime at the moment. So, for example, we've got a few sites that we're just permitting in Cairns. There'll be shopping centre sites, hotel sites and so on, and we'll sell them on to players that are in that market up there at the moment. Yeah.
And I understand you've got a terrific site there in Half Moon Bay, I think it is in Cairns. Tell us about that.
Well, that's a site that we've owned for a long time. We've owned it for probably 20 years. It was a site that we bought when we had a Japanese market in Cairns that crashed, and we actually bought it off Nara SeaWorld. And we've just held the site, done all our permitting. We've got a touristic 3 zone, built revetment walls, but it's a site of 2,000 apartments, and so it's a site that we will probably pass on to somebody who is geared that way. In the next 6 months or so, we'll look at selling that. Yeah, but a very, very strategic site between Palm Cove and Half Moon and Cairns.
And so from Victoria to Queensland and then over to Italy, I believe, with a project there. Tell us about that.
Well, that's a small project, but it's a love project. We've always spent time in Italy. Obviously, we're descendants of Italians, but the last 20 odd years I've been spending a lot of time in the Veneto region, because I've got a lot of great friends there, and this friendship developed over a property deal. They bought the Venetians, world investors and bankers, and they bought a large property off us that we developed, and so they would invite me there once a year, and I would host them when they would travel back here with their Venetian business friends. And one of these friends was a winemaker, and as everybody knows, my friends certainly know, it's a great hobby of mine, and they, in the town of Verona, which comes under the Veneto region, an opportunity came where there were 3 16th century buildings surrounded by the vineyard, and they said to me, Steve, they said, we're not property people, what would you do with these 3 buildings? So I came up with the concept of boutique, luxury suite hotels and spa and so on, and that's what we're developing at the moment. So,
and there wouldn't be too many developers from Australia that have ventured overseas, especially to Italy, to do a project. How different is it doing a development over there? How many hoops do you have to jump through?
It's called bureaucracy, Italian bureaucracy. Has been challenging, but being fluent in Italian, that helped, and also having the winemaking family who own a third of the project with us, you know, having people on the ground that assisted at council and so on. But we've really enjoyed the restoration. Look, it wasn't just impulsive because I spent time there. There's only really 2 areas where you would invest in Italy, and it's the regions of Lombardia, which its capital is Milan, and Veneto region, which is Venice, Verona.
Yeah.
They are the 2 powerhouses that really pushes Italy, where all the industry, you know, all your main designers and so on and so on. This is where they're based. So they're the only 2 areas to really invest in if you're outside of Italy, and it just happened to fall into one of those areas. So we knew it would be strong, and our real estate profile that we're looking at as a longer term investment still fitted.
Tell us about the success of that project in the end. Obviously there's been, you know, various headaches, as there always is with development, but where's it at now, and where do you want it to be in 5 years from now?
We're really we're at lock-up stage, so the properties are being painted and so on, but it's been enjoyable getting it to this area, even though you have your well, hassle's not the right word, but just getting through the bureaucracy that I was talking before about in Italy. Where do we think this will lead to? It's quite interesting. It just started off as a one-off, but we're being approached by hotel chains, major world hotel chains, to possibly roll out up to 10 of these wine themed hotels, because all the spas are wine themed and the products and so on. So we've had some serious discussions with people who want us to roll these.
And whether you're doing a development over in Italy or here in Australia, what do you look for in a relationship with the builders, with the suppliers, with the agents, all that sort of thing? What do you look for in a relationship with them, and what do they look for in a relationship with you guys?
Well, I think it's quite similar, whether they're agents or builders or whatever. You look for a relationship, you look for people that have the same values and work the same as you do, and you try to work together from the start, even before you buy the site. So if you've got a good team of people, agents, builders, who have the right sort of tradespeople, you tend to work a relationship before, and then if you're looking at a possible site, you bring them on and get their opinion and so on. No different than in Australia. The principles are very similar.
Sorry, as an example, in Italy, the architect we use, whether it's an architect here or over there, depending, it's about the value they bring to that particular project and the relationships they might have, say, with council and local builders, the type of thing. Over there was quite important to us, being our first project in Italy. So the architect we use, older guy, a lot of runs on the board. This is what he specialises in, and he knows the council very well as well. So he acted as town planner because he's able to do that, his capacity there. So for us, it was very good to know that we've got an extremely experienced person who can traverse that landscape of both town planning and through the architecture, but of a restoration of a 450-year-old building is not something anyone could do without prior experience. So that's really important to us, and probably especially in this case because Dad was over there for quite some time. I'm over there a couple of times a year managing things, but having someone that you can rely on over there is very important. I guess similarly here, using the right architect or group of consultants for that particular development, depending on the level of value that they add.
And now that you are sort of consolidating your assets and the projects you're doing away from, say, North Queensland into Brisbane and that sort of thing. Tell us about what the next 12 months looks like for yourself, Steve, and for you, Paul. What are you working on at the moment?
Well, really, we've made a family decision. We're realising our assets in far north Queensland. That'll happen over the next 12, 18 months, and our concentration is here in Brisbane itself, where Paul was really taking over the company, and that's where his main interest is.
Absolutely. And for yourself, next 12 months?
Yeah, I think that movement out of regional Queensland is important. As Dad was saying earlier, you've got to get the cycle. So it takes a little bit. Everything takes a bit longer, especially more so, probably the last 5 to 10 years. So we want to focus here, more appetite and trying to churn through things, and probably get a bit more happening in terms of different development, but also diversifying. So. My prior days in Mirvac obviously being mainly residential based, and Dad's experience in residential as well. We're both keen to pursue opportunities on that end as well. So trying to, I guess, diversify what we've got in terms of large format retail, commercial office, and then into a degree of resi as well is sort of what we're interested in. So whatever makes sense in the end, and if we think we'll enjoy doing that project, generally we're quite involved in the design. It's something that's important to both of us, and we've got the ability to hold stock as well, so that's where we've got really that sort of mixed bag of projects and experience under our belt.
And I think also with the cycle, you've got to think that a lot of our centres that we own here in Brisbane itself were developed by us 15 years ago. Well, they all, even though they're major tenants, they're all coming to the end of their leases, so they have the potential to become new redevelopment sites. The bigger picture, we have one site that's all single level with majors. It's a 5 hectare site very close to Brisbane itself. Well, council is talking to us about going up to 10 levels over the whole site. So there's new opportunities coming up, but still here in Brisbane, and that'd take up our time, and that's why we're trying to centralise.
And just on that, especially with the retail or the big box outlets that you've done, how has the shift to online affected what you guys are doing? Has it limited the amount of opportunity in that space at all?
It's an interesting question, because I obviously talk to our tenants. That's been one of our success. We manage our own properties, by the way, and so you're talking to your tenants all the time, and which I think is always important, but it's not about just that particular property, so that you keep them happy there and so on. They then tell you where they want to go next. It creates an opportunity. But on the online, having these discussions, they've all really moved into it themselves. And the last discussion, for example, that I had with one of our majors about that, they said, well, we've even gone another way, and they said, we've moved into Europe.
Wow.
So that's an Australian company, without mentioning names, and now having discussions because of our experience of being developers in Europe. And so it was a very interesting conversation about us now having the experience, knowing what we would have to pay for sites and constructions and so on if they move, for example, into Italy.
So would that be something that you might pursue?
Yes. There's been some serious conversations on it.
Terrific. One final one. What legacy do you want to leave for the business and for yourself? And I guess, Paul, how do you want to continue that legacy on as you take over the business?
Well, if I go first, legacy. Look, I'm very fortunate that I've got a son who came into the business. So I know of other property developers where it hasn't happened, and then there's how does it transition, who manages the properties then for the next generation. So I was very fortunate that I had Paul, who first of all was interested in it, and second is very capable. So my legacy is really leaving these sites that we've developed over the years, which is not only good income for the family, it's good cash flow for property when you are a property developer for the lean times, but also become future redevelopment sites, as I was discussing before.
Yeah, absolutely. And Paul, how do you want to continue that legacy into the future?
Well, I guess fairly similar to how Dad sort of, traverse his career, looking at opportunities as they come up and not being, I guess, afraid to go to different areas to see where you need to find those opportunities and dig them out. In terms of, what we're producing. It's about quality developments, especially the things that we hold. So Eminence, the current office building we've just finished, we're looking at what are we putting into the building now, because we're going to hold it a long time. So we want to make sure that when our lease renewals come up in 7 or 8 years' time, that those tenants are going to re-sign, or we're still relevant in the market at that time to release it. So I think it's really important to ensure that everything you do is quality, that then becomes linked with the brand, with the company, and it puts runs on the board that people could look at and go, right, well, these guys are going to deliver a quality product, whether it's res or whether it's retail or commercial.
Steve, Paul, all the best for the future. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul.